أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all of our viewers and welcome on Youth Matters with me, your host Sakib. And I would like to begin in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. And I would like to begin with a beautiful verse from the Holy Quran of Suratul Mu'minun, verse 1 to 2, which says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. قد أفلح المؤمنون الذين هم في صلاتهم خاشعون. That successful indeed are the believers who are humble in their prayers. Everyone wants to be successful, but what is true success? The criteria for success may differ from person to person. Hence, we need the criteria from the Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who truly knows what success really is. Success has been described as achieving one's desires and, attaining happiness. And whatever brings success in this world is short-lived and fleeting because we know that it is susceptible to change. However, success in the hereafter is not tinged with such transience. Those who attain happiness there will be able to retain the happiness forever. Thus, true success is that which is achieved in the world to come. Now, also when it comes to, us praying, right? Like, for example, from this verse, what we see is that humility in prayer is the sign of a healthy heart, one that is untarnished by the disease of pride and vanity. Now, one might ask, what exactly is humility? It is a keen awareness of one's own loneliness and the magnificence of the Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, on today's program, we will be looking into the servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that when we do these worships and ibadas, are there different ways of doing it? What is our real purpose towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Sometimes we self-doubt ourselves that am I doing enough or am I not doing enough? So inshallah today I'll be joined with a very well-renowned speaker, Alima Maryam. Alima Maryam Muaddil grew up in America and graduated with a bachelor's in accounting. And after working in an Islamic school as a math and Islamic studies teacher for about 2 years, she started studying in the Hausa. Studying for the past decade in the Hausa, she focused on Islamic philosophy, tafsir, and akhlaq. And she's an online content creator, teacher, and coach. She loves to work with the youth as well as sisters. I would like to welcome her on board. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Alima Maryam. How are you today?
Walaikum assalam. Alhamdulillah, I'm good. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much. It is a great honor and a privilege to have you on today's program. Thank you so much for taking out your precious time.
Well, thank you for having me. Alhamdulillah.
Alima, I would like to delve into understanding how to define servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or human way. Is it a forceful action? Is it done forcefully? Because when we speak of servitude, oftentimes we have misconceptions. It is more like a treatment. So the relationship that we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how would you define this?
So, servitude in general, like the term ubudiyat. Oh, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum Ali ibn Musa Raza wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, servitude means ubudiyat, essentially being a slave or being in service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, this goes on different levels. There we have an aspect of acknowledging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, acknowledging the Prophet, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent our Prophet. So one is acknowledgement. The second aspect of it is belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we have the dimension of acting according to our beliefs. And that goes into worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, doing the wajib, staying away from the haram. And then you have parts of it which is akhlaq, which is how you act with other people, how you deal with different things in a life and life, and etc. etc. So when you're saying forceful, what do you exactly mean? Because when I read your question, I was like, like, do you mean that we are forced to do this, or do you mean something else?
Yes, so sometimes, for example, when it comes to the obligatory acts,
Mm-hmm.
some people might have this impression that I have to do this, otherwise Allah will punish me, and they think of Allah sometimes that maybe he's as in a negative way sometimes. So
Yeah.
what sort of a relationship is actually a human beings and with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
So in Usul al-Kafi is one of our most important books of tradition. And within the Shia madhab, it's one of the most predominant books that we have. And the first chapter of this most important book of narrations is actually not Tawheed. It's not servitude. It's a chapter called Aql, Aql and Jah, which Aql essentially means intellect. What does this mean? When the first chapter, one of the most important books within the Shia narrations, is talking about Aql, it's showing us that within our religion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us a tool, this tool, to be able to reach, to understand who He is, at least to a certain degree, to be able to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be able to do the things we're supposed to do. Now, some of us, when we talk about, we think, well, we need to use the intellect to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to get to a point we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. And then once we have that point where we understand He exists, then we might not need the app, or we don't need the intellect. But this is far from being true. That's just the first step. Once you get to that point where you understand, okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, and we have to submit to Him, then follows along getting to a point where, okay, actually, obviously, inshallah, we want to have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We want to have iman to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We want to act according to the halal and the haram. But in between the halal and haram, there's a plethora of different actions there isn't in this category, in these two categories, right? Going to school, it's not halal or haram. Getting groceries, it's not halal and haram. Going to the park, it's not halal and haram. Going to a coffee shop, it doesn't fit in any of those two categories. And most of the actions and the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, it actually doesn't fall in these two. So my point being is that everything else is we're supposed to figure out through the intellect. And that is this power that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us to figure out what works for us in life. How do we live our life? How do I pick my spouse? How do I decide what school to go to? How do I decide what job to take? When do I decide to become a mother, etc.? Like all these different questions that come up when we live, and it doesn't fall into the halal haram category, right? And there's a reason that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala limits the halal and haram to a specific group of things, of praying 5 times a day, fasting, staying away from ghibat, from gossiping, staying away from hasad, from jealousy, etc., etc. Like there's just a limited group of things. Now everything else falls into this category of mubah, and figuring out, okay, what do I do now? And so it's up to us to utilize this app. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't want to mandate every single thing for us. He gave us this intellect to figure out, okay, what do I need to do? He gave us this ability to figure out, and He doesn't want to tell us what to do in every single second. He's given that opening for us to develop our app and figure out, okay, what is my responsibility right now? Right? Is it to get a job, or is it to study? Is it to get married? Is it to, I don't know, whatever the situation might be. And it's through, and majority of those things as falls into that category of mubah. And we have to learn to make these decisions, and it's not easy. Something that often people come and ask me is like, should I do an istikhara for marriage, right? Or that's like something that's so common, right, in our communities. We should do istikhara for marriage. For first of all, you have an aql. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted you to use this tool. When He gives you a blessing, it's for you to use. Part of doing shukr, thanking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to use that blessing He gave you. And so if you go straight to istikhara before using your aql to decipher, should I marry this person or not? It's a type of kufr, it's a type of this like neglecting a blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you, and especially it means you're neglecting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's important for us to use this ability of ours and develop it even further. So it's a huge aspect to our religion, but unfortunately, sometimes we forget to talk about it because most things actually fall into this category.
Very well said. I think you have put it out in a very well manageable, very understandable way, because yes, it's very true that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given all humans a free will, and He has given us the intellect to make, choices. So that makes sense that, we are not like His slaves, because when we look at in the dictionary or something like that, the actual meaning of the word servitude, it implies that, you owe your master something. So, you're forced to do some things, but um, you have explained it very well, and it's understood that that's not the relationship. That unfortunately sometimes there are misconceptions maybe amongst human beings and amongst people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us that free will. Now, Alima, Mariam, oftentimes, we get too carried away in our day-to-day chores, and we forget to soulfully connect with Allah at a more authentic and a spiritually uplifting level. So, what other ways do you think can one do to do this apart from, just obligatory ones, like just apart from, praying namaz and fasting and all of that?
So as we said, we have the halal and we have the haram, we have the wajib and then we have the haram. So other than those things, which is set in stone and we know we have to abide by, everything else is in this category of mubah. So when you go to work every day, when you go to school every day, or if you're a housewife or you're taking care of your kids, we all have certain responsibilities, right? Depending on where we are in life. If you are single versus married, your responsibilities are different. If you are a mother or just a wife, your responsibilities are different. Now, what's beautiful in our religion is that you can take something that's mubah, something that falls in none of these categories, and make it an act of service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How? When we talk about an action, there's two parts of an action. One aspect to it is the intention that you have. The second aspect to it is the action that you take. Now, which one of these two do you think is more important?
The intention.
The intention. The intention is more important. It weighs heavier within the Islamic realm. It's more of a, it has more weight. And the reason is this, because let's say you want to do something. Let's say you want to give a charity. Let's say you have the intention to, let's say, go to Hajj, but you're not able to pay for Hajj. You're not at a point where you can afford Hajj. You still get the reward of it according to our beliefs. You still get the reward. That is why the intention it's heavier. It carries more weight. We are working for the akhirah, right? The akhirah is forever. And the reason why it's forever is because a lot of what we receive in the akhirah is just based on our intentions. So going back to your question, one of the things that you can do is that you can just make the intention of the things you do and do it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Very basic. And that just means that all the things you're doing during the day, you're doing the same things. So in terms of time, there's no difference. But all you're doing is taking a moment before you start that action and talking to Allah and saying, "Oh Allah, I'm doing this for you. Bismillah." And I know it sounds very simple, but it can be actually hard because it requires thought and it requires being present in the moment and before you dive into whatever you're doing. So if it's just cooking food, or if it's just studying, or if it's just going to work, having a moment of thinking, okay, I am about to go to work. I am about to cook dinner. I am about to do XYZ. I'm doing it for you, Allah. And that is the difference between a believer and a non-believer, or a believer that is more mindful of what they do. Ayatollah Bahjat has this quote where he says, what does that mean? It means that we we take we we are in a loss of what we don't believe in. As in, we can live our day-to-day lives the same way we're living, but just switching the things that we believe in. As in, we just up our game in our belief and our intentions. And it doesn't take that much. It just requires for us to focus a bit more. And that focus in itself, by the way, is not easy. Like what I'm telling you, I've had classes with students, and I had given them this task of trying to make it, having that intent for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the actions they do. And majority of them came back said it's very difficult. So if you want to get to that point to make everything with that intent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I would just say pick one thing during the week that you do for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you do every single day. Once you have that down, then pick another thing, like make it two things. And as long as you get to a point where this becomes like a norm for you, then you can add and add and add. So just work on one thing per week, and inshallah, if you make that change, then everything you do is essentially servitude. It's worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then whatever you do has a light, it has nur to it, inshallah.
Inshallah. I really liked the point how you touched about the different responsibilities that different individuals have, because oftentimes we tend to compare ourselves. For example, when you said, like, a wife's responsibilities are different from a mother's responsibilities. Once for example, when you're a mother, you sometimes often look back that, okay, when I was just a wife, my responsibilities were quite lesser. We don't feel it, we don't realize it until later on when the responsibility actually takes over you. And also, there are different ahadith and narrations that also tell and suggest that, for example, when you're giving time to your family at home, when you're spending time with them, that is also considered as an ibadah. Like, you're worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, like, for example, sometimes, as mothers, we feel guilty that maybe I'm not able to, for example, give more time in prayers, in extra prayers, or maybe, I've missed out on a couple of fasts of mine, all because obviously you're busy with your children. You have to give them quality time as well. So, it's just sometimes like a person should not feel guilty in that way, because obviously you have to cover up for your past. That's not an excuse, but to realize that you're not wasting your time when you're sitting with your family, because that is also counted as an ibadah. I really liked how you touched about the part of making that niyyah, which is very important. The niyyah, it carries a lot of weight. Now, also when it comes to students, when we have these strong exam pressures, we usually tend to self-doubt our abilities sometimes. For example, maybe we might feel, you can feel less confident. So in those times, how can one remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and seek for help and guidance?
So when it comes to studying and preparing for exams, there's two aspects to it. One is doing the work, studying, and then the praying, the tawakkul, the tawassul, all of that. First, I want to dispel this misconception that sometimes we think that we can pray our way from studying. They're like, you can just do Salatul Layl and not study and get an A. That doesn't work. Like, that does not work. Sometimes we think that as Muslims, just because we have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that means that I don't have to do my work. And in any matter, whether it's your work, whether it's being a mother, whether it's school, that doesn't work. If you want to catch the bus, you gotta run to catch the bus. And yeah, you make dua, you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to get to that bus. But if you don't run and you don't catch that bus, you're to blame. Right?
Yeah.
So it's important to do both. And if you still miss the bus, let's say you run and you prayed to catch the bus, you've done your tawassul, all of that, and you don't make it to the bus, then it wasn't your bus to take. It wasn't your risk. So, and that's okay, right? So it's important to that you do both, that you are studying, and if you're, even with studying, if you're lacking, then look for more resources. Find a tutor, find someone to help you, find a study buddy, find other things
Yeah.
or other ways to up your game in studying. That's one. Two, then comes in the dua part. That when you then you study, you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, help me. That you purify your intentions and say, oh Allah, I'm studying for you, so help me. Then it is doing tawassul and asking the Ahlul Bayt. This is very helpful. To I remember when I was taking a philosophy class and it was essentially the philosophy of Mullah Sadr. And the philosophy of Mullah Sadr is very heavy. And sometimes in the midst of my class, my teacher would just stop and he would just be like, Assalamu alaikum ya Fatima al-Zahra. Or he would say, Assalamu alaikum ya Hussein ibn Ali. Or he would say salam to one of the Ahlul Bayt. Then he would say, okay, make dua, pray, and then he would ask us to do a salawat. And for the longest time, it would bother me because he would be in a flow of teaching and he would stop in the middle of class and do this. And I was like, why is he doing this? This is frustrating. And over time, what I realized is that the reason why he's doing it, it's helping us understand the material. When you stop in the middle of trying to learn something and you're struggling in it, and you stop and say, Assalamu alaikum ya Fatima Zahra, and you ask her to help you, and you send a salawat and you pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help you. Because when you say salam to the Ahlul Bayt, it brings light. It brings light to your heart and it makes it easier for you to understand the material. I remember when we were studying Nihaya or Bidaya, my teacher would be like, Bidaya is a book on philosophy that Allama Tabatabai has written, and she would tell us that recite a Fatiha for his soul. And she would tell us that the reason why I tell you to recite a Fatiha is because it will bring light to his grave, but also he will in return pray for you. And so it's interesting, like just little actions like this for praying for those who've passed away, saying salam to the Ahlul Bayt, saying a salawat, this itself can help you understand the material, especially whenever you get stuck. For example, you have a calculus exam, and I know a lot of people who struggle with math. I used to be a calculus teacher myself. Just say Assalamu alaikum ya Fatima, Assalamu alaikum ya Rasulullah, salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Just say one of these things and say salawat and ask them to help you. Believe me, it will help and it will open up that wherever you're stuck with, it'll just make sense to you. So it's that, and then having tawakkul, where when you're studying for an exam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to help you study, obviously. And at the same time, as much as you study, if he doesn't help you remember everything that you have just studied, you will not remember. So having tawakkul and relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where you say to Allah, oh Allah, like I've studied, I've done my duty, I'm asking you to take me to the rest of the way. Because my memory can just go blank. I can get anxious during an exam and I can forget everything. It's so easy to forget something that you've studied. So having that tawakkul and relying on Allah that He will help you is important, and hopefully will take you the rest of the journey. So again, just to sum up, two things. One is actually studying, and the second one is tawakkul and tawassul and relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that because I think it's just, I don't know, in our culture or I don't know what, usually, or the students, right? Just, I pray to Allah, so He should do it. It will be a miracle. But we have to work hard and then, do tawakkul and leave it on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also when it comes to spouse selection, I don't know, but sometimes I think this thing even works, this criteria plays a role in this area as well. Like, you're just praying to God, oh, I want a really good husband, and I have there's a wish list, right? And then we get something which is realistic and real, and now we have to accept that. So we have to work hard ourselves first, to make that change. If we want to see that change in our spouses, for example, maybe if maybe they're lacking in some area, so we should work on ourselves, and then automatically, that change comes within the couple automatically. That's one. And there's also a very famous ayah in the Holy Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that asa an takrahu shay'an wa huwa khayrun lakum wa asa an tuhibbu shay'an wa huwa sharrun lakum. That sometimes we don't realize that maybe there's something that we hate so much, but Allah doesn't Allah loves that thing for us. And sometimes there's something that we love and He doesn't want that for us. Maybe because there's khair in it for us. So these are some good reminders that we need to look into. Now, I want to go into the lifestyle of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam and see what possible examples do we find or see from certain role models where they have taught us, multifarious ways of servitude towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah. So when it comes to the Ahlul Bayt, if you look at history, the way they would react in different times was different. Let's take the Prophet, for example. The Prophet, during the time of the Prophet, he was just establishing Islam. At the beginning, he was in Mecca. He was at the first year or two. He was only preaching to his family, his close people around him. And as time progressed, he started inviting all of Mecca. He started inviting and more people to Islam. And then he did Hijrah to Medina. And it started to become a political movement, not just a religious one. And we see that the Prophet has a huge political movement happening. Then it comes to Imam Ali. Imam Ali, after the Prophet passed away, he was not politically involved. He had to sit in his house. He was gardening and he was doing like a lot of other things other than political aspects. And then when it came time for him to be the Khalifa, he became the Khalifa and he took over on his political role. Then you see with Imam Hassan, he was the Khalifa for 6 months and then he had to go into silence. We see with Imam Hussein, we all know the story of Imam Hussein. At the beginning, he continued his brother's role until it was Yazid's time. And he ended up, we know the story of what happened in Karbala. Again, that was what his duty was. Then we see with Imam Sajjad. Imam Sajjad was teaching people, but not directly. He did it through his du'as, the munajats that we have from Imam Sajjad, the du'as that we have from Imam Sajjad. That is the means he was teaching people, because he could not go out and speak out loud during his time. Then we see with Imam Baqir and Imam Sadiq, these two imams, what we see what their duty was at the time was to teach. They had a lot of students because at the time there was political instability, and so it gave them some relief and room to be able to teach a lot of students. Again, and then the next Imam Musa Kazim. Imam Musa Kazim was in prison for many years, and so it became very difficult for him to be able to do so much. He had to because he was so high on the radar, he had to do things without being public about it. Then we see with Imam Ali Musa Rida, Imam Rida alayhi salam. He was taken by Mamun, he had to go to Khurasan. And because he was Wali al-Ahd, he was crowned the prince, he was able to talk to, so he had debates with Christians. Because he had that position, he was able to use that role and to work against the government and also spread Islam. So, and then etc. The Imams afterward, what we see is the trend was that there was a much more political difficulty at the time where the Imams could not speak out a lot. And so they were preparing the people for the time of the Imam Mahdi, where the Imam would not be present. So they had to start preparing the ground for that. Now, what is my point of going through a very brief history of all our imams is that the imams acted in different ways. They did not act in a similar manner. Why? Because the timing was different during the time of each imam. The situation was different during the time of each imam. And that is why their reaction to things were different. The responsibilities was different. If Imam Sadiq was there at the time of Imam Baqir, or if Imam Sadiq was there at the time of Imam Hassan, and he was the Imam instead, he would have done the same thing that Imam Hassan would do. It wasn't their personalities that was different that caused that difference of reaction. It was the fact that the timing was different, the situation is different. What is my point about all of this? My point is this: different times and different situations calls for your responsibility to be different. Meaning that when we are growing constantly, our responsibility also changes. When we're younger, when we're just children, our responsibility is pretty much limited to being a child and being respectful to our parents, studying, whatever that entails. When we grow older, we end up getting jobs. Our responsibility might be to studying, right? If you're doing a bachelor's or master's or whatever degree. If you are, or you end up getting married, your responsibility change from just being a child of someone to being a husband or wife. And when you're a husband and wife, your responsibilities are very different than not being married. And then once you enter the phase of being a mother, again, especially being a mother, it's a huge shift. And it's a huge shift. And so accepting that and allowing and understanding that your identity is changing when you're going through each and every phase of your life. And that means the time you have to do different things that you used to are going to be more limited, and it's going to shift, and that is okay. Like, I think one aspect of it is accepting the fact that things are changing, and you might not be able to pray as much as you used to or recite Quran as much as you used to, and that is okay because your responsibility is different. And understanding that if you want something and it's not happening, it everything has a time and place. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mandating that for you, or is not allowing you to have a child, or if you mentioned, well, sometimes you want to get married and it doesn't happen, and it's hard. It really is. But it's understanding that if you're there at that point, there is a hikmah, there's a wisdom behind it, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Hakim. He is the all-wise. He doesn't do anything other than it's good for the believer. So it's accepting that where you are in life, wherever that might be, and recognizing, okay, I'm here right now. For example, I'm not married, and I've been trying to get married, but it's not happening. Okay, so what is my responsibility? What is my responsibility to my family? What is my responsibility to the community? Is it to teach? Is it to volunteer? Whatever that might be, depending on where you are in the world, wherever, it will be different. And depending on your capability and your talents, this will look different. And that is okay. It's just figuring that out, inshallah.
Inshallah, inshallah. And Alima Mariam, I feel like the best time when a youth can really spiritually connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is especially when he hasn't fallen into all these responsibilities. Meaning, before you get married, for example, or when especially when you're still very young in your tender years, because at that time, as you said, like, you're very limited, you don't have a lot of responsibilities still on your head. So that's the best time when you can really, like, do a lot of prayers, and explore different types of du'as and stuff, because your mind is really, like, free at that time, and you are able to connect and explore a lot into these areas. And let's go for our last question for today, inshallah. That sometimes when we feel low and disappointed, sometimes maybe we feel ungrateful with lots of negative thoughts in our minds. Some days, how can we overcome this challenging phase?
So the first aspect of this is understanding what you're dealing with, because sometimes it's just an emotion, like it's just sadness, right? Something negative happens. Let's say, God forbid, you lose your father, or God forbid, you lose a child. You have a miscarriage. feeling sadness in that situation is very normal, and it's just, we're human beings. We are meant to feel sadness and happiness and all of that. So going through emotions are very normal. Now, sometimes it's not an emotion, it's depression. It's important that when you're dealing with these things, you understand, are you actually dealing with depression? Or is it just sadness? Is it something that is passing? Now, the difference between sadness and depression is when you're sad, it's just something's happened, something's triggered an emotion, this emotion, and it comes and it goes. But if someone's depressed, it usually, the sign, it's not just the emotion, it's also there's other symptoms that comes with it. It could be that you're not eating well. It could be you're losing weight. It might be that you're not sleeping at all at night. And like it comes with all these things, and it can usually lingers at least for 2 weeks or longer. So I think it's very, very important to understand, what am I dealing with? If you understand that, then you can deal with it. If it is depression, which a lot of times it is, a lot of people deal with depression, and it's very normal. In today's day and age, unfortunately, majority people will go through some type of mental problem. Like depression is very, if it is depression, it's very important to understand, where is it coming from? Is it because of, like, is my issue, if I'm, God forbid, I'm dealing with depression, is it due to biology? Is it because I'm not getting enough vitamin D? Is it because I'm not getting enough omega-3? Is it because I'm not getting enough exercise? And when I say exercise, I mean like 20 minutes walking 3 times a day. Basic. And am I not socializing enough? Is it some of these things, and I know it sounds basic, but some of these things will trigger depression. And those are just like the biology aspect of it, where you can, by just changing something in your normal routine, you can fix that. So it's important to understand, is it coming from that? Sometimes it's not those things. It's sometimes it doesn't have to do with those things. Also, I also want to add that when postpartum depression is also very, very common, I think majority women do go through it. I've like just surveyed via talking to all my friends, and most of them don't want to admit it. But then when I kind of get talking to them, they kind of say, yeah, essentially I went through it. So I don't even, most times when sisters tell me, oh, I didn't go through postpartum depression, I don't even believe them anymore, because it's so common. And understanding that postpartum depression, it's very normal, and it's usually hormonal, and added to the fact that you've changed who you are. You went from being not having any child to having a child and becoming a mother. It's an identity shift. The emotions you feel are different. And so accepting that and allowing yourself to mourn, because you've left the old self and became a new self, and you are constantly trying to keep this baby alive, essentially, right? And trying to feed it, clean it, put it to sleep. And it's a shift, and it takes a lot of mental energy, and it's hard to go through that stage. Whenever we go through stage different, whenever we have a shift in life, whether it's moving to a new location, whether it's losing a family member, whether it's becoming a mother, and even becoming a mother, I know it sounds happy. It sounds like, oh my God, I've become a mother, and it's a great thing. But at the same time, there's a sadness that is associated with it, because you lose a lot of your freedom. You do. You're constantly like a slave to this baby, essentially, because you have to keep the baby alive, right? And it's this, and a lot of women go through this process, and they grieving their past self, because they miss that freedom. They miss that being able to just go out whenever they wanted to. And that is okay. It's okay to wish, like, want to still have their past. But it takes some time to process that, and that is okay. And sometimes that shows up as postpartum depression. So accepting that and allowing you to grieve. It's okay to grieve, and it's okay to be sad about that. But it's really important that the husband understands this. Unfortunately, a lot of women don't understand like postpartum depression. And I think it's extremely important that they're on par with their partner and know, hey, this is a huge possibility that this happens. I've even seen that with women that even before they give birth, they fall into this postpartum depression. I guess it's not postpartum at that point, it's prepartum, but they fall into that. Yeah. And so it's important to understand that's okay. And if you need help, getting therapy, there's no problem with it. If it's just even let's say it's not postpartum, it's you get into seasonal depression, or it's just depression because there's certain thoughts that goes into your head. There's so many therapies like CBT, TA, etc., that you can seek and get help from a counselor or a therapist to help you get through the thoughts that's triggering those emotions and the depression. So if it's to a point where your doctor is giving you antidepressants, antidepressants are only meant to be taken in a year and to get therapy while you're on those antidepressants. I'm not a fan of antidepressants, to be honest, but if someone has to take them, they have to take them. But it's important that you're getting that therapy. If you're at that point that you're on antidepressants, it's important to get therapy at the same time so you can eventually get off those medications and change. It takes time, though. It's not something that happens overnight, and it's okay. So that's okay. So that's the depression side of it. Now, if it's just sadness, you're dealing with something difficult. Let's say you made an F on an exam, or something happened. Your parents told you something sad, that told you something that made you sad. It's important to understand that in life you're gonna have ups and downs, and sometimes it's because you lose something. There's a verse in the Quran that it's one of my favorite verses. It says that ما أصاب مصيبة إلا في كتاب الله. And then the second, اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد, لكي لا تعسوا على ما فاتكم وتفرحوا بما آتاكم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this verse that He does not take something from you or doesn't give you something other than it is predetermined for you, as in it's written in a book. What does that mean? I remember for the longest time I would read this verse and I was like, what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about? Where He gives you something or takes something and it's written for you. So that, and the second part of the verse says that so that you not grieve or get too happy. And for the longest time I didn't understand what was this verse talking about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about emotions, talking about getting things and losing things. And I finally, after the longest time, I finally understood what it meant. And it means that this is what it means, is that, let's say someone gives you $1 million, like, would you get happy? You'd get happy, right? Now, the next day, let's say you go broke and all that money is taken away from you. As much as you get happy for gaining that $1 million, you're going to also become sad. And this is a point. It's like a seesaw, okay? As much as you get happy for gaining something, if you lose that thing, that's how much you're gonna get sad. And so it's important that when you gain something or lose something, we recognize how much I get sad or how much I get happy is the same as it goes the opposite. And so that's why, like, when you get something, it's important to recognize, okay, this is temporary and it's alone. It's gonna go away eventually. And as much as I'm like on the moon about it, I will also be really mad and upset once I lose it. And these things are everything in the world that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us, it's alone. It's not there forever. And understanding that can help us prepare our mindset that, like, when we lose it, we don't get that upset. Or at least we're able to control our emotions. Emotions go and come. Like, I'm sure we've all experienced sadness, but it passes eventually. Even when you lose someone in your life, that's like one of the most difficult things to go through life. Eventually it will pass. That difficulty, that sadness that you feel, eventually will pass. Now, when you lose someone, it's gonna take time. It's not something overnight. You will need time to grieve, and that is okay. Sometimes I know people think that, okay, since we're Muslim, we shouldn't be grieving that long, or this is dunya. No, we are human beings. It's okay to grieve losing a beloved one. That is okay. But just know that these emotions that you're feeling will pass eventually, inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us in a way that these things will pass. And so both happiness, these feelings of happiness and sadness will pass. And just know, okay, this will pass. And kind of knowing that kind of helps you, it helps you, give you some time to process it, and hopefully, like, prepare you really, okay, this will pass eventually. This difficulty will pass. This sadness will pass, inshallah.
Exactly. Thank you so much. I learned the same thing from a lot of experiences. I feel that time is the best healer for any situation that we go through. We need to give this other person time. Sometimes, we are just expected to snap out of it, right? Like, for example, as you mentioned, maybe a person is sad, he has lost someone really close to him, someone beloved. Now, you can't
Mhm.
just expect that person to snap out of it and and get back to normal reality. Of course, it will take time. For example, coming out of postpartum depression, you need to give this mother time because now she's completely lost her identity and she feels different. So it's difficult for her to attach and connect with this new baby of hers. So yes, I agree with you, time really makes a big difference. We need to be patient with such people, with ourselves. Of course, we are human beings, and it is fair to express our emotions as well. I really like the part about the post depression, that how sometimes men don't get it because it's so true. Maybe it's because biologically they don't give birth, so they don't understand. And usually you will see there's like even after they become the father of the child, they're still sort of living that bachelor life. You need to like remind them that you're a father now, so you take up some responsibility. Yeah, in some scenarios, of course, men are different as well. Some are really good and understanding. So yeah, I really enjoyed today's discussion with Alima Mariam, and it was so nice connecting with you directly like this. And mashallah, these were some doubts that some of the viewers as well had, that I had compiled all together. So you answered it very well. I honestly, personally enjoyed today's discussion, and I look forward to have you, in our upcoming programs and also on different platforms, inshallah. Maybe perhaps even on our Instagram live, so that we can have a live audience as well. So that would be great, inshallah. Thank you so much once again for your precious time. It was a privilege. Jazakallah.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning on today's program. And Alima Mariam, really inspired me today, and I hope that she inspired all of you as well today. She really, touched very practically on some certain key issues that we go through in our daily lives, and how she connected to the servitude to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. Meaning, we should never underestimate ourselves when it comes to our worships and ibadas, because there are different ways of doing it. So, Alhamdulillah, it was a great session, and I hope that all of you enjoyed and benefited. Thank you so much. This is your host, Sakina Habib, and Jazakumullahu khairan. Have a lovely night. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.